Hey everybody, and it is time for our first lecture. It is a video lecture, obviously, because you're watching me, and we're going to be talking about the first part of the 20th century in Europe, and specifically we'll be talking about World War I. Now, this lecture will be lined up with the outline that is available on Blackboard. It will also be lined up with the chapter in the book. So you just need to be able to reference both of those things. I would highly suggest reading the chapter in the book that is non-extensive, but it will help you ultimately as we move forward towards exams and writing assignments in the future. But I do want to start off with a little bit about what Europe was like at the beginning of the 20th century. Obviously, Europe had been around a lot longer than the United States. And I think a lot of people kind of just think that European countries just sort of always existed, and in one way, shape, or form. And certainly that is not the case, especially with two countries that we'll be talking about a little bit here. Well, one a lot more than the other. But Germany and Italy, they did not become full-fledged countries until the late 1800s. They were actually little kingdoms. Germany was all these little principalities and kingdoms, and they'd have their little princes and everything else in different regions. And it wasn't until Otto von Bismarck brought them together that you have a proper Germany. Now, Germany is very strong, a very strong country. It will have strong ties to the United States, which is going to make World War I and World War II somewhat of a difficult decision for the United States. Same thing with Italy. Italy was a lot of principalities that had to come together. Now, you had your stalwarts of England and France, but then let's go over to look at Russia. And Russia is an absolute mess. Russia is way behind the curve. And in fact, in the early 1900s, Russia will have a conflict with Japan called the Sino-Russo War. The Russo-Japanese War, sorry about that. And Japan is going to kick Russia's butt. And people are going to be really kind of shocked that this big hulking European nation is going to be defeated by Japan. So if we look at this in a global context, we have to understand that there are things happening all over the world. But Russia in particular is kind of stuck in an old system. They have a czar, they have basically feudalism, they still have serfs. Serf sort of being like a peasant, and it's really just not a system that is working out for them. They don't have any modernization. And that's why during World War I, you will actually have the Bolshevik Revolution where you see the Soviet Union come to be. And obviously the Soviet Union will become one of the United States' primary rivals for quite some time in the future. But if we look at what else is going on in Europe, we start to see this little thing called nationalism start to pop up. And nationalism, we don't want to confuse it with patriotism. Now, you can be patriotic, you can love your country, but typically the difference between nationalism and patriotism is with nationalism, you basically say your country could do no wrong. Your country is better than every other country. Everything your country does is right. And this creates rivalries with other countries. Patriotism, you can be like, I love my country. I love the United States of America. But I realize that there might be some issues here and there that we need to deal with. So this idea of nationalism is starting to rear its ugly head throughout Europe. And you start to see these countries taking aggressive stances toward one another. Now, we're not quite into the outline yet, but what's going to happen is countries, as they start to become more powerful and more nationalistic, are going to go try to find other countries to ally themselves with. And now we are going to start getting into the outline here. So World War I, what is going to cause World War I? Well, the easy answer is, if you look at point number 3, it's the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But really, it's this network of alliances that are formed throughout Europe. Now we have to understand that there will be some transitions and changes in these alliances as the war goes along, especially in relation with Italy. So let's look at point one here. And if you look at the outline, you'll see a little graph down there that kind of shows you this crazy little bubble of all these alliances, when they allied with one another, and all this fun stuff, how they overlap. The Triple Alliance, which is what we will basically consider to be eventually the bad guys of World War I, are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Now, Italy is going to be an outlier in this because part way through World War I, and World War I, we're talking about 1914 through 1919, and about halfway through World War I, the Brits are able to sort of bribe Italy to drop out of the war, and they do that by offering them land in the Dalmatian coast. Again, you'll need to pull up maps to see that if you want to. But our big bads and the team, I guess, the country that will ultimately take the blame for the war is Germany. Now, Germany, whether or not they are truly, oh great, my dog has got his loud toy. I'm going to have to go take it away from him. I will be right back. Okay, and we're back. He's not happy about that, but I had to take it away because it is very loud. So Germany will ultimately take the blame for World War I. Whether or not it's truly their fault, we'll see. The quote-unquote good guys are the Triple Entente. And the Triple Entente, the way to remember that they're the good guys is if you could remember that if France is a good guy, the word entente sounds French. So the Triple Entente is going to be France, Russia, and the United Kingdom. These are going to be what we consider the good guys. Now, what are good guys and bad guys in this war? Both sides are going to do lots of really bad things during this conflict. The good guys are the good guys because they won. That's pretty much how it goes. Now, the purpose of these alliances was to create mutual defense pacts to each other to deter aggression. So if it was simply, hey, Germany can attack Russia and nothing will happen, then the Germans might attack Russia. But if it is, hey, if the Germans attack Russia and then France gets involved, and then England gets involved, that will then deter the Germans from attacking the Russians. It's protection for the most part. This is a way to balance the power in Europe because you have all these countries becoming nationalistic. They are trying to show their power. They are trying to show that they are better, but they are also very fearful of one another, and partly because part of nationalism is also building up large militaries, and that's going to be one of the keys here. If a country builds up a large military, they typically want to use it. Now, the United States today has a very large military, and we don't use it that much. It shows great restraint on our part. But at this era, especially in regard to navies, as you would build up large navies, you wanted to use them. And we have to remember we're still also in an era, and one of the other issues that we have going on here is with colonies throughout the world. This is still an era where England, France, even Germany, to a lesser extent Russia, to a lesser extent Italy, they have colonies throughout the globe. Like Africa has a presence of the Germans, the Dutch, the French, and the English throughout its continent. Same thing with Southeast Asia. You have all these different countries that have a presence, these colonies. And in fact, one of the things that makes this a world war is that this war will spill over into those colonial holdings. Now today, there aren't a lot of quote-unquote colonies left. I mean, for like instance, the United States has its protectorates. You know, we have Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, but they're not what we consider colonies. We're not trying to pull resources out of them and use them for our benefit. We give them a sense of autonomy, but that's not the case here. If you were a British colony, like the biggest one, India, the British government is in charge of India. So we have to understand that that's also a dynamic that we've got going on here. This is not just protection of your borders in Europe, but it's protection of your colonial borders as well. So, where does it all get started? That's the big question here. Where does it all get started? Well, that takes us to the Balkans. The Balkans are an area, Bosnia, today it would be Bosnia-Herzegovina, that region. At the time, it would be Serbia, Yugoslavia, different countries as the map has changed over the years. Now, what we have to understand is that in the Balkans, there is a desire for them to have their own autonomy. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is in control of the Balkan region, meaning that countries like Serbia fall underneath the control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And what they want in that area is to have their own say and their own control. So in this instance, I'm going to bring up a word. It's called tripartite. Three parts. They basically want to create the Austro-Hungarian Balkan Empire, where there is the Austrian part, the Hungarian part, and then also a Balkan part that has its own its own sort of administration over it. Now, this is an interesting cause, and I won't go too deep into the history of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but let's just say he was sort of next in line to become the Austro-Hungarian emperor. And he decides to take a trip to Bosnia, and he is going to try to bring about peace in the region. And it is going to be disastrous. There is a group of Serbians called the Black Hand. And the Black Hand, they want to cause chaos, and they want to create a state of chaos in the Balkans. And so they are going to attempt to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So, despite warnings, despite that his life could be in danger, the Archduke decides to go on this trip. And he enters into the region, and while there, they try to assassinate him. They run out, they see his car as it's driving down the road, they throw bombs at it, but it fails. They miss. Okay. Seemingly, he's on the defensive. They decide to leave and try to get the heck out of Dodge. One of his guards is injured, so they go to the hospital, and they're going to go visit the guard in the hospital. On the way, and this is one of those massive coincidences of history, on the way to visit this guard in the hospital, they end up turning down a one-way street that has a dead end called the Apple Key. And it just so happens that as they're going down this street, one of the assassins is eating at a cafe. This is the legend of it. Whether or not it's 100% true, we never truly know. But his name is Gavrilo Princip. And he sees the Archduke. Now, this is, 1914. So cars do not have reverse. So when they get to the end of this dead-end street, they have to get out and turn the car around manually to try to get it to go the other way, because there is no reverse. You can't just throw it in reverse. Gabriel Princip looks up from his lunch or dinner, sees the Archduke, goes toward the Archduke, shoots him, and kills him. Well, now we have a problem. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was sort of the last line of defense to try to create some sort of agreement, some sort of peace in the Balkan region. And now, he's dead. This launches a very punitive effort by the Austro-Hungarians into Serbia. Well, what are we going to do? So, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declares war on Serbia. Well, there is a problem. The Serbs and the Russians have an alliance. So, when the Austro-Hungarians declare war on the Serbians, the Russians begin to mobilize on the Austro-Hungarians. Well, the Austro-Hungarians have an alliance with the Germans. So when the Russians mobilize against the Austro-Hungarians, the Germans start to mobilize against the Russians. Well, the Russians have an alliance with France. So when Germany mobilizes against France, or against Russia, the French start to mobilize against Germany. Same thing with Britain. And then you have the outlier, the Ottoman Empire, who will be allied with the Germans. And basically, I always like to equate this to like a schoolyard fight. You go up and, little Johnny and little Billy are getting ready to have a fight. Little Johnny goes up to little Billy and punches him in the face. Next thing you know, little Lou, who's little Billy's friend, comes over and hits little Johnny. Well, little Johnny's friend, little Chad, jumps in and hits little Lou. Next thing you know, you have everybody fighting, and this is what happens in World War I. This system of alliances is what is going to create this massive dust cloud of conflict in the region. So what should have been a very minor regional conflict, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Serbia, which should have technically been the Austrians punishing the Serbs, balloons into this huge international affair because of these alliances. Well, there you have it. World War I has begun. Germany declares war on Russia and France. Britain enters the war due to Germany's invasion of Belgium. Now, this is where we get to the von Schlieffen Plan. Now, I don't have a map of Europe up here, but basically the von Schlieffen Plan was Germany's plan to basically wipe out and take over Western Europe by invading through Belgium. The problem was in World War I, they weren't quite fast enough to do it. They were still reliant on fairly slow-moving military personnel. The Nazis will use the von Schlieffen Plan in World War II and be quite effective with it because they will have all sorts of fast-moving tanks and airplanes and everything else. So as we look at the critical analysis of this, the alliances transformed this regional conflict into a global war. There was no, today we have flexibility. If you look at this point, it says the rigidity of the alliance obligations and the lack of diplomatic flexibility. Well, there was really no flexibility. There was no way for these countries to get out of these alliances. They had made these agreements and they had to live up to those obligations. Today, things are played out more in an international diplomatic way. We have the UN. That didn't exist. There was nothing like it. So we need to understand that what happened as started as a very, very, very minor regional incident balloons into this world war because of these alliances. All right, well, we'll consider that part one of this lecture. I will record probably a couple more parts, and this will give you some chunks so you can digest it easily. So continue on to part two, and whenever you're ready.